Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And it comes as absolutely no surprise to me that you've chosen this session over Brexit. I, for one, have been incredibly excited about this moment since this guest confirmed that she'd be able to come along to the festival. I was tempted to run off and find a red carpet that was long, that fit from Brooklyn to Cliveden, a la Meghan Markle, for you. And there could be no more appropriate venue than Cliveden to interview you in, which has long been associated with literary genius, empowered women, and no little scandal. And Naomi Wolf, you have a long relationship with England, stemming from your time as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And for everyone who knows, Naomi burst into the world with her totemic beauty myth, heralding what has been labelled as a third wave feminism. And you've pointed out that society imposes upon women standards in terms of our appearance. I doubt that no one in this room is unaware of all the controversy that followed. I've reread The Beauty Myth, as we've been discussing this weekend, every decade of my life, and it remains a manifesto for women, and it's prescient in so many ways, especially today. But The Beauty Myth was just the start. For many years, Naomi has written prodigiously and developing a significant body of work and remains the go-to interviewee for all matters pertaining to feminism. And I've just been told that Naomi has written, well, this is the first time that Naomi has spoken about her new book. So we've got a Cliveden scoop here, an exclusive. And your new book is called Outrages, Love, Censorship, and the Invention of Modern Homosexuality.
Different subtitle. There was a
it's changed. Yes. Okay, right. Okay, so that's the first exclusive. So tell me about that.
Sure. No, this is very important to me. The actual proper subtitle that I've been fighting for quite a long time, and my publishers have been wonderful in getting there, is Sex, Censorship, and the Criminalization of Love, because it's a book about love.
So it's not about homosexuality.
It is about homosexuality because it's a book about love.
So take us on that journey. Tell us about that book. When we all run out to the shops or click on Amazon to buy it, what are we going to expect?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, can I just say thank you, Natalie, so much for that incredibly generous, overwhelmingly generous welcome. And also thank you for this amazing gift to the world, live streamed, of having all of my favorite writers and personal heroes and heroines in one place for the weekend. I cannot believe that, Sarah Waters, Leif Qureshi, all these people who have so affected me growing up as a writer and as a person, Simon Jenkins, so many to name, would all be in conversation together and with the people who also share this privilege of being physically here. So I'm so glad that you're sharing it with the rest of the world, people who are not lucky enough to be physically here, and it's so exciting. So Outrages, yes, we have a super special guest in the audience, who is also my personal hero, which is my thesis advisor, Dr. Stefano Maria Evangelista of Trinity College, Oxford. And Outrages, the book, came about because Dr. Evangelista wrote an amazing book about the reception of Greece, ancient Greece, classical antiquity, by British homosexuals in the 19th century. And he opened my eyes to the ways in which Greece became a kind of idealized nation where men loved men, and that was obviously socially normative in certain demographics. And this was a way for British men who loved men in Britain at a time, and this is what my book is about, when laws were increasingly being passed, increasingly metastasizing to criminalize both male-male love and affection and sexuality, and also speech, and these went hand in hand. But it was when Dr. Evangelista kind of gave me the texts to illuminate this way that men used Greece to code safely discourse about love and about intimacy at a time when it was becoming increasingly illegal to even talk about men loving men. That was sort of my first baby step on this incredible journey that I narrate in Outrages. And if you want me kind of very briefly to kind of say what Outrages is. So, and this is the first time I'm talking about it in public, so this is exciting but also a little terrifying. I thought that I was writing about the origins of women writing about sexuality in the 19th century when I wrote my thesis.
So it didn't start as a
It
book
didn't
about
start,
homosexuality?
no, not at all. But when Dr. Evangelista gave me the first of 3 gigantic green tomes of the letters of a man named John Addington Symonds, whom I would be surprised if many of you have heard of. Who's heard of John Addington Symonds? Don't feel ashamed or embarrassed. His name has been very much allowed to fade from history, but he could be arguably one of the founders of the modern gay rights movement. And so I read this man's letters and, cover to cover, and I was so compelled because this was a guy who was born in Bristol in 1840 and came of age a generation before Oscar Wilde and the trials that are so formative in what we think of as kind of the start of consciousness about oppression of gay men and the resistance to it. But 30 years before the Wilde trials, John Addington Symonds was coming of age. He went to Balliol. He fell in love, and he then spent the rest of his life. He married a woman. He had 4 daughters. He was a paterfamilias. He was a respected critic, a respected essayist. He had this whole kind of Victorian, superficially very, very respectable life. But he also struggled his entire life, not just with obviously powerful attractions to men. He was gay. He was what we would call gay. That term didn't exist then. But he struggled with the desire as a writer to write about it and to express it. And then as laws began to proliferate, criminalizing increasingly, not just sodomy, but criminalizing how men related to each other, how they wrote to each other, stripping away the last, vestiges of privacy. Men had to be intimate with each other, just as laws against speech metastasized from 1857 for the next 3 decades. He tried genre after genre to write about the love between men. He tried historical biographies. He tried, poems in which meanings were embedded secretly, and his friends had a code to the poems. He kept really beautiful, quite sentimental poems about men falling in love with each other in a locked box in his study. It was literally locked. It was not a metaphor. And he and his friend went and threw the key off the river, the bridge at the river Avon. He didn't throw away the box, he threw away the key, right? So his whole life, there was this tension between his desire as a writer and as a lover to express and also to advocate for the naturalness of men's love for one another, and to articulate what it means to be a man who is sexually attracted to men. And his risking more and more professional danger, personal danger, and then at the very end of his life, he succeeds in a way that my publishers have told me I can't tell you yet. But he let's just say he sent into the future the seeds of a manifesto that would be the beginning, the germ of what came to be sexology and what came to be the way we now think about male homosexuality and any sexual variation, which is natural, organic, on a spectrum of human variation, and not enmeshed in language of vice and criminality and morbidity. So that's outrageous.
It sounds like a completely fascinating read, and I can't wait to get hold of it.
Thank you.
But you just touched on language, and anachronism is something that any social historian struggles with, especially with a subject like homosexuality. Can you just give us a little bit of an insight into how you use language around that subject, which must have been very difficult for you to handle?
I really appreciate that question because it's very, very hard. It's hard for 2 reasons. One is that language that we take for granted didn't exist then. So the word lesbian wasn't really in common use. Lesbianism wasn't even outlawed. There were no laws against it because it didn't exist the way we understand it to exist as a sexual identity. Women slept with women. Men slept with men. What's amazing about going back in history in the years before sexology is how couples were recognized in society, even though the law did or didn't recognize identities and certainly criminalized some acts like sodomy. But words like homosexual, didn't exist. In the 1860s, one of the very first texts to talk about men who loved men had to invent language, and Ulrichs was the guy, and he invented the word earning, which I'm probably mispronouncing. So then people in that subculture had to invoke being Uranian, or earnings. So there was always a difficult struggle with language, and there was a fight over language because, of course, there were pejorative, what we would call homophobic words like, catamite and, somdomite, which is how, misspelling that the father of Lord Alfred Douglas used in attacking Oscar Wilde, which led to the famous first Wilde trial. But so I'm fighting a lot with my copy editor right now because throughout the book I have to say what we would today call gay, or what we would today call the closet, or what we would today call homosexual, because it is ahistorical to assign thoughtlessly backwards. Sometimes you have to categories that exist or language that exists now that doesn't. On the other hand, I also think as a cultural critic, it's very, very liberating to learn in a book like this that there was a time in which there was, how can I put it? Labels liberate, but they also reduce, right? And we think about sexual identity today very much in the language of sexology, but the language of sexology really looks at sex acts, right? Whereas what's so interesting is to go back to a time when, what this man was writing about, he was writing about erotic love, but he was writing about love. What he wanted was erotic love. He fell in love with Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass because Walt Whitman was writing about eros, but he was also writing about love. Adhesiveness was a word that Whitman coined, that Simmons embraced, about the love between men. The great camarado, comradeship. They were struggling to find terms, but they weren't, because it was before sexology, they weren't reductive, and because they were great romantics, they weren't reductively sex organ based or sex act based terms.
So it's about the universality of love.
Well, you could certainly say that. Yes.
So
yes.
that kind of partially answers my next question. But what you've written so beautifully and prolifically about feminism and women. What was it that made you want to write about male love?
Well, these are such great questions, and I realize I've never answered them before. Just before I move on to that, Natalie, can I ask the audience, did you understand what I just said about language? Oh, beautiful, thank God. Oh my God. Because, this is this terrifying moment, and Natalie, as a writer, you'll maybe appreciate that when you really don't know if this dialogue you've had inside your head and with one or two other trusted people is gibberish or not. But, thank God. All right.
Well, that was very clear to me.
Okay, good. We're cool then. We can keep going. Well, when you said, is it about the universality of love? I did want to add something to that. Yes, but I want to kind of unpack that question too, because I think in a post-sexological age, like this book isn't just for or about gay men. In a post-sexological age, heterosexuals think about their sex life reductively as about sex. And it's just fascinating that there was a time before we were taught to do that.
So was that part of the reason that you decided, what made you gravitate, what made homosexuality your topic that you wanted to embrace, or was it just something that came to you?
Honestly, I can't say that it was, because truly the journey was that I had a very brilliant, gifted, great teacher. And through the brilliance of his pedagogy and the brilliance of his scholarship, I saw, just through research, I saw this, extraordinary character. So as a writer, I was drawn to him. I care about free speech a lot, and so part of the story of Outrages is the story of the invention by the modern state of censorship, of state censorship, which really was invented in 1857 in Britain and kind of exported to, most Western democracies. I mean, I'm not singling out Britain in a mean way, because Britain also kind of invented free speech to start out with. So I was drawn to those subjects, and just when you read this man's letters and his correspondence with Walt Whitman, and the way that so many decades before we think it happened, this group of British bohemians, and it's not just these men who we now call homosexual, and their friends. It was also passing characters like Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Christina Rossetti. They were struggling to articulate visions of a world that is our world, right? And you can see right back where those first discussions about feminism, about free love, about access to contraception, all of these were happening in the 1850s and the 1860s. And the woman question was the question of the day, the 1870s. These are not new questions, but we are kind of taught that these debates really originated in the 20th century. So to go right back and see where, right at that crucible where the modern state was thinking, okay, we've never told people what they can do in bed together as a modern state. Let's, in so much detail, let's try this and see if it helps to control populations. Because that's really the thesis of my book. Underneath these amazing stories is that the modern state figured out new tools to control increasingly restive, increasingly literate populations that were demanding rights and education and minimum wage and,
So it's basically a conspiracy theory book as well. So I think that
No, I wouldn't say that, and I may have gone too far afield for your question, but when you say it's a natural question to say, was I drawn to homosexuality? And I guess my answer is I was drawn to this character, these characters, and to the restless originating of freedoms that we take for granted, and it manifested through these characters who were struggling for homosexual rights. But I can't claim that, what drew me was the freedom.
Well, I'm sure I'm fascinated to read it. I can't wait.
Thank you.
And may we move on to feminism
Absolutely.
now, because it's something that I really want to talk to you about. Your work has been credited with establishing the third wave. We've just been talking about personal issues. I have 3 girls, and I feel that as parents, especially as a mother of 3 girls, I need guidance about how to help them deal with their femininity and their sexuality right now. I'm fascinated by the idea of fourth wave feminism that has been brought on by the use of social media, selfies, Instagram, and that have been equated with liberation and vanity and gender oppression. I just want to know where you stand on the impact that this is having on women and young girls in today's society.
Social media specifically?
Yeah, and how you can help me and the other parents guide my girls in this age that my generation is quite frankly lost in.
Wow, I mean, I'm so flattered that you think that I have wisdom to offer about this, because if my daughter was in the room, she could share all the mistakes I've made. I had an assistant, a young woman, who called me the empowerment nag. So, so I'm sure, all of us as parents, I don't know a parent who doesn't feel like they're not doing it right, and probably the ones who think they're doing it right are the ones making the worst mistakes of all. But I do know that social media, from my own life as a parent, it's the world that our kids swim in. And I confess that, in my other life, I'm CEO of a tech company, so I'm in the digital space. And I did that partly because I do think technology can liberate and empower people who are dispossessed and voiceless, and especially girls, if it's handled right, if it's the right technology. So social media could like it has this horrible corrosive effect that you and I have talked about. We could talk all night, and it's true, where your child is in the room with you, but they're really having 18 different emotions because their friends are liking them or not liking them. And it's awful, and it definitely rewires the brain. You know, there's no question our kids are addicted, we're addicted, and my next job is to create an app where you can just block, access in the whole room so nobody can.
Well, that sounds good. Bring that one on.
Yeah, right. But that's real. But I also see how kids who were, before the internet, the only, gay or lesbian kid or the only queer identified kid in their town would not have friends and would be ostracized, and now online they immediately find their communities. So I see that as empowering. I see social media as being very empowering. Like the Arab Spring was run by 19-year-old girls from their cell phones. People don't know this, but it was Egyptian girls on their cell phones, teenage young women who were really organizing and deploying a lot of the activity of the Arab Spring in Egypt. And they were able to do it because the internet lets young women show leadership in a way that takes away a lot of the tension and anxiety about leadership when you're sitting on a stage and having a lot of people stare at you and talking to them. Right behind your cell phone, you can get your networks to protest. And I was just contacted by a 19-year-old at Yale who's organizing a protest against sexual abuse at Yale, and without her social media, she probably couldn't convene people as efficiently or get the word out to The Guardian, which ran a story this morning. So I'd like to see the positive of it, but when it comes to parenting, I'm with you. I mean, it's a constant fight, and I say, you guys are doing it right by blocking and taking it away periodically. Tying it to good behavior is also, or punishing, I used it as a punishment and it worked. Like, I'll take away your cell phone. Okay. And the last thing is, I think kids even more than, how can I put this? I think kids, especially in certain demographics, like the bubbles that, my kids grew up in New York, are also very much affected by a lack of any boundaries in their school and in the culture. And I have seen boundaries solve the problems that social media seems to constantly represent.
Well, I think it's about, you're right, it's about having role models, I think, positive role models, because actually I hadn't thought about it like that before. There are so many positive values to elements to social media that, and it's just, I think, our generation needs women like you to actually guide our girls about, how social media can be used to empower them rather than disenfranchise them. So yeah, that's a very interesting point of view. You just mentioned Yale, which is very topical at the moment in America. And I, for one, have been gripped by what's going on at the moment with Kavanaugh. I just wanted to briefly touch upon this with you and to ask about first of all, what your take is on what's going on, where you feel the MeToo movement fits into where the MeToo movement is with it, and talk to us a little bit about accountability, it's
wow. I love that you go right to the kind of
Well, I don't have long. I've got.
No, you're right. There's a lot of pressing stuff in the headlines right now that is very gendered. I was interested in the body language in the audience when you mentioned Kavanaugh. A lot of people, including me, shifted and were very physically uncomfortable. I mean, what can I say? It's not over. I'm a rape survivor, so which I've only recently been saying in public due to the Me Too movement. I don't think before that I had the courage or energy.
So was it the Me Too movement that inspired you and gave you the confidence to be able to speak out about it?
I mean, it certainly was the Me Too movement that made a difference between my not talking about it and talking about it. I don't know if it's confidence so much as when women and men start telling just telling the stories of what really happened to them, what survivors know, which is it's so pervasive. Everybody has a story. You know, maybe not everyone has been, you know, literally raped, but everyone has a story or stories. It doesn't normalize. It reassigns being a rape survivor into the right category, which is you've survived a crime. A crime was committed and you survived it. And crime is rife, and you know, people commit crimes, and that's it strips away a lot of the creepy discourse before the MeToo movement and I experienced this as well. And you know, when I was, you know, mishandled by a professor later as an undergraduate, before the MeToo movement, if you came out and said, yes, this happened to me, let alone accused a powerful man, accused, that word is so awful, reported the crime of a powerful man committing a criminal act in public, you were the object, the evidence. You know, what was wrong with you? Were you too seductive? Were you dressed wrong? Did you give him the wrong signals? You know, and with rape, of course, were you out too late? I mean, I was a child, so obviously.
How old were you?
I was 7. But with the MeToo movement, and it's so healthy because now so many people are talking about trauma and PTSD and how the brain works when you've had a trauma like that. It does create a context of dignity in which people can just tell the truth, which is really exactly why I was drawn to Simmons. You know, like, what does it take to tell the truth? It doesn't just take a truth teller. It takes a context in which that truth can be heard.
Wow. Well, that's really honest and incredibly emotional. I think it's incredibly inspiring when you've used your own experience and you've created this tremendous body of work, which is so empowering.
Thank you.
How do you manage to disentangle your personal experiences from your professional life, from your professional work? Because your arguments are so lucid and so rational. And your
Can I just bring you with me everywhere I go? Listen to her, what she said. I don't have to talk, she'll say it. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, how do you manage that process? Take us on that journey of that disentanglement.
Well, I think the beauty of feminism, and also, you know, a nod to the gay rights movement, which I grew up in the center of, growing up in San Francisco in the 70s, is that it didn't ask you to disentangle your personal experience from your analytical conclusions. It, you know, both of these movements, the women's movement in the 70s and also the gay and lesbian rights movement in the 70s, when I was a child, really did say, you know, did critique analysis as the culture presented it, as this disembodied voice that also happened to be a white male disembodied voice, which is, you know, a neat trick. And the women's movement and the gay and lesbian rights movement said, let's look at our own life experience and re-reason from that. So I don't think that I restrict, you know, my critical thinking to my life experience, but I don't rule it out either because, you know, with each of my books, it kind of started with, well, I've had this experience. Maybe other women have had a similar experience. Then you do the research and you find out that, well, you know, yes, you know, so many women have eating disorders, or, but that's a legitimate way to. I don't think it's sufficient if you just stop with your own experience, unless you're a memoirist or a novelist. You know, that's fine. I think it's as a reporter, you're trained to trust eyewitness accounts, and I'm an eyewitness account of. I'm an eyewitness of my own life, and how I'm treated as a woman and what I live through as a woman. So I don't want to discount that. What's interesting to me, probably why I love Whitman, is he also looked at his own life and said, you know what? It's the whole range of it. I'm going to use it. You know, it's legitimate for me to use it to transcend. You know. To reason beyond, to live beyond just my personal experience. But I guess where I'm going with that is it's very interesting to me that I'm often attacked for taking my own personal experience seriously. And it's so interesting because male writers aren't attacked for taking their personal experience seriously. Thank you.
What I found fascinating / horrifying is that you've actually been attacked by a lot of women. Now, it's no secret that you and Germaine Greer have had your ups and downs. You recently critiqued her essay in the Sunday Times, which, you definitely found yourself with each other with differing views. And I've often wondered with feminism, do you feel that it's part of a healthy debate to disagree with prominent feminists, or do you think that these disagreements undermine the greater cause?
Well, another fantastic question. I had this argument with other feminists in a book called Fire with Fire, which is now out of print, but I think it's an important, a very important question. Women are 52% of the human beings on the planet. So if, this nonsensical, actually 19th century idea that we should all be sisters and not disagree with each other and not say anything, be critical is sentimental and counterproductive, and no one would ever say to 52% or 48% of men on the planet, you guys all need to get in alignment before anyone will, take you seriously as a gender. And the other thing is, and these things all circle back, right? They all circle back to free speech and freedom to love. When you stifle debate in any way, you keep movements and people from evolving and learning. And feminism was so boring back when there was only one position or 3 items on a checklist. No one wanted to be a feminist because it wasn't a living movement. And you see the same thing happening with other social movements that create orthodoxies. Britain, I'm sorry to say, and the United States are at risk right now because of no platform movements, because of Twitter censorship, because of this safe spaces, this rise, and I say this as a rape survivor, this rise of the notion that ideas can, is not rise, but a bad re-manifestation, this idea that ideas can harm you. Suppression of ideas harms you. So I think it's healthy that Germaine Greer, Dr. Greer wrote her book, as appalling as I think it is, horrible and destructive and disastrous, but if that's what she needed to say, it's good that she has the right to say it, and I think it's good that readers of my essay got to see me take it apart bit by bit and, disembowel it.
So we're on the subject of prominent feminists. Another feminist who I'm a great fan of, Caitlin Moran, uses humour.
Love her.
And she uses humour to communicate her message. And as a tool to kind of puncture preconceived notion of what a feminist is. What's your view about humour? Do you believe it's a form of compromise, or do you believe it's a tool that can be deployed effectively?
I love funny people, and I always think that some of the great social justice activists were hilarious human beings. Not everyone has the gift of, Caitlin Moran's gifts are extraordinary. She's able to be very thought-provoking and extremely funny at the same time. That's a rare quality. But I think it's all good. Look, the 70s imprinting of feminism has done so much damage that we even have to kind of wonder, are we allowed to have fun? Are we allowed to disagree? My favorite activists talk about how people burn out unless they have parties and beauty and pleasure and great music and great food and a good time, and it's true. So I bring it on. I mean, these are dire times. We need to laugh as much as we can.
So you've just mentioned beauty, and that's something I want to talk to you a little bit about now, in the beauty myth. Do you when you wrote the beauty myth, one of your complaints, one of your observations was that women had to adhere to this Hugh Hefner form of beauty, tall, skinny, blonde, enormous breasts, pneumatic lips. Do you feel that beauty has now become more democratic?
Well, I think that what's happened, which is great, is, well, probably not much more democratic, although there are these gestures toward kind of a slightly more inclusive range of size 8 models on the, on the covers of fashion magazines. But what's really much more important to me is that people's own thoughts about themselves have become much more inclusive and democratic. So I think, when I wrote The Beauty Myth, women really did feel, with very few exceptions, that their value had to be measured against these images that were being produced by manufacturers and Madison Avenue and so on. And now I find that is very rare, and even your daughter's generation and my daughter's and son's generation, the young women I meet and even the teenage girls, they may still suffer, and sadly, eating disorders have not changed much. That's still as prevalent and serious as it has always been, but many more young women I know and young men feel entitled to critique and reject those models as not relevant to them, and the whole body positivity movement and just the movement of women saying, you know what, I've got a lot of interesting things to think about, and I'm going to enjoy myself and love myself and appreciate how I am in my body. I see that as much more prevalent now than it ever has been. And when that happens, those images become much less powerful.
Can we talk a little bit about your view about men?
Sure.
Where do men fit into this debate? I mean, in the UK at the moment, you open, you read a newspaper and there's articles, pictures about the objectification of men. On our TV at the moment, there was Tom Hiddleston's bottom in The Night Manager, and we've had Poldark's chest. I don't know if you watch any of these shows, and then we just had Richard Madam's bottom again in Bodyguard. So we seem to be bombarded by these images of naked men, and it seems to be an overcorrection.
Wow.
What is your take on it?
I mean, I'm afraid I'm not going to be very profound about this. Running a digital content company, it's about clickbait. It's about getting people to look on that page. If you offer them someone's nice bottom, you just you raise your click rate if you appeal to women and men. What do I think? At the end of The Beauty Myth, I said creepily, predictively, that Madison Avenue would discover how easy it is to objectify men and manipulate their self-esteem, and that happened. We saw it. I think young men are much less confident in some ways, or have more of a sense of the beauty myth pressure than they used to be before anyone decided to objectify them in mainstream culture, in our society. Of course, there have always been norms of male beauty in the past, culturally. But I think, God, where do men fit into the beauty myth? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, where do men fit into the beauty myth? And also, how should we be educating boys about, how should we be educating boys? How should we talk to men? How should we be bringing up our boys? Because I think women, girls, there's so much discussion at the moment, so much thought being put into how to bring up our girls. Right. But boys are 50% of the debate too.
Yeah.
So,
wow, so such important questions. So to me, I think we need to fast forward a little bit in terms of the kind of imagery we're thinking about. The kids today are growing up bombarded with hardcore pornography everywhere they look. That's their reality. And hardcore porn is like a huge part of how kids think about the body or are raised to think about the body. And so in a way, Vogue is kind of the least of our issues, especially because a lot of people, we just heard this yesterday here at Clifton, people who work with teenagers say that, what they're seeing is becoming more and more violent. So the norm of male aggression is becoming more and more exposed to young women and to young men. I can only talk about what I did, as a parent, because I always feel like no one can tell another parent how to parent, right? But from my own experience, I did talk to my kids a lot about how addictive pornography is and how it is not a real representation of sex, and that it's much better to develop one's fantasies. Teenagers never like when you say your, like one's fantasies or one's, scenarios that that are important to one from one's own imagination and other human beings, rather than, these often trafficked images. And I talk to them about human trafficking, and I talk to them about the fact that the people in these clips might be doing it at gunpoint. I mean, these are real things. And I also tried to create a very positive, healthy, sexually affirming environment in my household, meaning a lot of books lying around that are good books that as a mom I read through and I thought, this is informative, it's true, it's accurate, it's positive about sexuality. I tried to not assume I knew what sexual identity or gender identity they would be. So, I tried to make, if they wanted to be anything, I wanted it to be obvious that was not even a question, right, in our household. And mostly I think I tried to talk to them about talking about sex with a partner and consent, both of them, and safety, and your right to your own body, and also talking to them about respect and love. I never let myself talk about my children, right, because, that's, as a Jewish mother, that's just like, you don't want to invite the fates or anything. But and I also respect their privacy. But I think now that they're both adults, effectively, I do think they're really. I think those were the right choices. I don't think that's going to save everyone from every hardship or difficulty in their lives. But I kind of feel like these images are the symptom. And they're the symptom of dysregulated lives and values. And that if we go back always to freedom, respect, and love, then people are getting filled up by things that are other than these addictive streams. Like what we've been talking about today is addictions, right? The addiction to images, the addiction to social media, addictions to, stimulants we haven't even talked about, but addictions to status, addictions to money. We live in a society that is trying to keep us heavily addicted, because then we're very malleable politically in other ways. And, always when you go back to, which is why I'm so drawn to these two characters, Whitman and Simmons, when you go back to love, spirituality in the sense of seeing the natural world as, coextensive with whatever the divine is, right? If you go back to intimacy, if you go back to human connection and respect, I do find that these other things kind of fade more in their power.
Well, it's about filling the hole with something meaningful.
I think that's safe to say.
So, feminism. You are a card-carrying feminist.
I am.
I wonder about feminism. Do you think that the language that is used in feminism, do you think that the pursuit of feminism is becoming more and more the preserve of the elite?
I don't understand the question.
Do you think that, do you think that feminism is about, the liberal elite and,
I've never. Is that something I'm saying in Britain?
No.
The liberal elite?
But do you think that it is about it's about women who've been highly educated, dissecting issues, and it's not a democratic pursuit?
No, I do not believe that. I believe that there have been times when, in a bad symbiosis, both the media, which tends to be made up of those people, highly educated people who are not paying attention to people who are not like themselves, only interview people of the same background and call that feminism. And certainly the women's movement has been guilty of a blind spot about not being inclusive and diverse and representative, and certainly a blind spot in when middle-class women wrote about issues they faced as middle-class women, not recognizing that that is a slice of a demographic rather than the whole world. So there have been those blind spots. I think that they've been largely, they come up all the time. Every gathering reflects the blind spots of its conveners. So
you feel like we're in a good place at the moment?
No, I was going a little further than that, which is that where feminism is really most exciting right now and most impactful is actually not in these little demographics that we inhabit. It's actually women in the global south and feminist leaders in Muslim countries, which a lot of people don't know about. There is a very active women's movement in across the Muslim world. There are women in women's organizations in across the continent of Africa. These and also Asia are creating new critiques, new structures of equality, arguing for new forms of law to protect them. Women in India are being incredibly vocal about new kinds of laws, and that's where the world will really be saved, because A, it's fresh thinking. B, we in the West, who are of our reasonably shared background, though I don't have a house like this, which I would like someday, but to have comfortably. But we kind of have figured out, Western feminism has kind of figured out what's wrong with what's keeping us from being equal. Like the analysis is largely complete for equality. We know what laws we have to change. Culture changes more slowly, attitudes change more slowly. But in the global south, they're in a position to really build new institutions, pass new laws, create new organizations, and especially with like the critique of Islam from within Islam by feminists, or the critique of Orthodox Judaism from within Orthodox Judaism by feminists. These are totally new, exciting, thoughts. The movements against female genital mutilation by women who have been victimized by female genital mutilation. These are important new advances, and everyone who looks at the climate catastrophe concludes that the quickest way to save the planet and to cure poverty is to empower women, especially poor women. So to that end, I would like very much for the great influencers of the world who hold the purse strings to quickly understand that if they want to save the planet and get rid of poverty, they have to support these grassroots feminist movements all over the world.
And talking about great influencers, I imagine that one of your greatest dreams to see a woman in the White House.
I mean, I really don't care about the gender of the person in the White House. And what's interesting about our kids' generation is they don't believe in gender in the same way that our generation assumed gender was fixed and binary, right? So obviously I'd like to see a woman in the White House pretty soon, because it would be a sign of a working meritocracy, because it can't be that for hundreds of years, even after women got the vote and could run for office, that there are no women with equal qualifications. But more than that, I'd like to see good policies coming out of the White House.
So what would you advise the next presidential candidate? and then
this hypothetical
yes,
female?
Yes,
you mean Elizabeth Warren?
Or Oprah?
Or Oprah,
yes,
interesting.
If you were sitting by her, what would it take to get this metaphorical woman into the White House? And then that's my last question. I promise you, I'll open it up to the floor.
You sure you didn't molest someone when you were 17? I don't know, I'm sorry. I'll just redact that. What would I tell her? I mean, honestly, I would tell her not to make Hillary Clinton's mistakes.
The two greatest ones were?
I mean, she just kept referencing the glass ceiling and referencing gender as a rationale for electing her, instead of using that as using the experiences she had, if she wanted to talk about being a woman, as a pivot to be inclusive and address the kitchen table struggles and the struggles for healthcare and the just really terrible struggles American working class and middle class people are facing these days.
Would you ever run? Would you ever go into politics?
Never, ever, ever, not in that way. I feel like I am in politics.
Well, exactly. That you are. If you've created a movement, I think you should be able to make laws. But
well, I do. Well, thank you for bringing that up, because I feel like I'm in politics in the way that I can survive and be effective, because my company Daily Clout has something called Bill Cam, which I really want you guys to have in Britain quickly so you know what you're actually getting with Brexit. But what Bill Cam does is it embeds live state and federal bills in social media and also creates a database where you can search them. And so literally you should be able to tweet the document that is the legal document on which Brexit will be based to each other so you can read it. Like right now you're having all of these huge debates on documents you haven't seen. It's so untransparent. So to me, the greatest gift you can give a democracy is transparency and access to the laws and access to the process of lobbying and making laws, passing bills. And so, it's working really well with Bill Cam in the US, and my dream is to do a UK Bill Cam so that everyone here can just on their phone while we're sitting here, search any bill, lobby their MP, and find out, what is really going on with huge statutes and laws that are being passed over your heads.
So, okay, I think you've had enough from me. I'd like to open the floor to some questions. Or I can just keep going.
Hi, my name's Gabriel. So I'm part of a community of artists, young artists in London, and I see a lot of my female peers who are obviously starving artists trying to come up, enabled by the internet to engage in various levels of sex work, from camming to selling pics on Instagram to actually meeting men in hotel rooms. And then obviously it's very tempting for them because they use this money to fund their work, and they reassure me that this is empowerment, that this is feminism, that it's sex positivity. What would you say to them?
I mean, I'm not going to... First of all, thank you for your concern for your female friends. I mean it. I mean, there's such a role for, men in feminism as allies and supporters, and it's just nice to hear. I know what you're talking about because this is very widespread in the US as well. New technologies have made it really easy for college students, like my interns talk about this, to meet up with a sugar daddy and an older man who will just pay them for a date, and it's hundreds of dollars and they need to pay their tuition. And it also destigmatizes sex work, to have the app be that interface. And really with, what are all of the, I don't even want to name them because they're all so obscenely named in the United States, but all these dating apps that, facilitate hookups, it's very hard to rationalize, well, if I'm going to, do a dating app and hook up with someone, why not get paid on a similar dating app? It's especially to fund things that are so hard to fund, like art and education in America. I'm not going to say to them that it's not feminism. It's their choice. It's their decision. I think it's very dangerous. So I'd be more concerned to make sure, if they want it, that they know how to do it safely, how to avoid dangerous situations. I personally feel that there's something different about selling sex than selling anything else. Maybe selling a baby is like selling sex in this category that is different from other kind of market exchanges for me. But I've thought about this a lot, and I've never found, honestly, a good logical reason that I feel that way. It's kind of a spiritual belief of mine, which I can't transmit to someone who doesn't feel that way. So that's my probably inadequate answer. I mean, it's a deeper political answer, like why are artists starving? Why are students starving? Why aren't we putting art and education at the top of what we fund as a society? Yeah. I'm so sorry. I wish I could be more helpful. Was that that's probably not a useful answer, but it's an honest answer.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle. In a post-gender fluidity world, I would love to hear your thoughts on a more of a love fluidity world, when we might be dealing with AI and falling in love with robots and machination.
I was so afraid someone would start
Sorry.
to ask these questions. No, look, we're there. I mean, we're there. I can't, I'm not going to judge, right, how people find emotional sustenance. I personally love the human, and I think the human is at risk by technology in a lot of ways, not just AI and robots. I think that we need to kind of campaign to save the human, just like we need to campaign to save the planet. And I think something very profound will be lost when we're completely intermingled with machines and completely dependent on machines.
How do you suggest we campaign to save the human?
Well, that's a really new conversation, so I don't have an easy answer, but I guess the first step of any movement is to articulate what the need is or what the fear is, right? And a lot of people don't feel the way I do. But I mean, there are ways like AI, like you can't censor people's access to technology. You can't say, why would you buy that sex robot? A lot of people would like to buy the sex robot. You know, I'm not going to say they shouldn't. You know, I guess the only thing I can say there is the same thing I've been saying for 15 years about pornography, which was at the very beginning of when I began to talk about porn, I was like, this is going to colonize our brains. It's going to undermine people's relationships with each other. And at first, this just fell on absolute deaf ears, or I got a lot of criticism for it. The science is now in. It does colonize your brain. It does undermine people's relationships. So I think we, you know, I guess there's going to have to be some studies showing what happens to people who are, you know, withdrawing into life with machines only, and people, like cigarettes, you know, then we'll have to disclose the risks, and people have to decide for themselves. Is it worth not having human contact that's very rich, but I get this very reliable, you know, sex machine or this. I hate Siri, right? Do you know what Siri is? Maybe, yeah. Oh, and I hate Alexa. And I hate Alexa because Alexa's like the perfect woman. She's like, I'll tell you what time it is in Memphis. You know, it's like, I don't fucking know what time it is in Memphis.
Alexa can't get pregnant.
I mean, just wait, right? You know, I hear you, but I feel threatened on a very reptile brain level when there's this disembodied woman's voice in the room, you know, that is so much better at everything than I am. So, you know, I ban Alexa. You know, I don't want Alexa in my house. I try to be very retro in my interactions with technology. It's ironic because I have a tech company. But I'm aware of when, I try to be aware of when the texting is draining my relationship with the people around me. You know, these are such tiny steps, but you're betting, like, if I were an investor, it is a sure bet. It is a sure bet that there will be super hot robots within 4.5 years, male and female, variations on genders, both genders, all genders. Think about that, like, right? Woo. Now, and they will be, you know, escorted into Clifton House. And are you going to say they can't sit down at the table?
If they look like Richard Madden from Bodyguard, they are welcome any day of the week.
I mean, that is going to happen, and then I don't know what we do, because all we can do at that point is to privilege the human. This is the great challenge. You know, it's the great challenge because people who understand AI are often saying to me that soon they're going to be doing things that are not directed by us. Have you heard that as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I'm much better than Alexa.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll tell her that. But again, you know, I don't have a set answer, because this is like this new world that's almost upon us is going to break open everything we think connection is.
I open the idea of loving, like, aside from the fact of the sex robot. But
do you want to speak a little louder so everyone can hear you?
Yes, I mean, just beyond the sex robot, you know, the idea of loving a machine, or you know having an emotional relationship with AI. So it's not just about kind of the physicality or mechanics,
right?
But that there's also something tender.
Well, we're already loving machines, right? Are these? I was sharing with you.
I think my girls love their iPhones more than they love me. So,
I'm sure that's not true. But these apps are designed to addict you and to give you little boosts of dopamine when, you know, you do something and get a like or a congratulations, or, you know, this is making you feel attachment, right? Studies have shown that when people watch pornography and masturbate to it, they are attached to that person that they masturbated to, right? And the attachment is taken away from their relationships. So our brains are not, they're very malleable, right? And love can be cultivated. So I'm not going to say people won't feel love for these machines, whatever that is. I'm going to try to say that we better, as a human species, figure out what we value and what we want to keep with us and what we want to nurture and protect into the brave new world, because it will quickly be drained away if we don't.
Maybe I can see two, three. Oh my God, there are like millions of questions. Oh, okay. Oh God. Okay.
Last week during the Kavanaugh hearings, which were distressing for Americans, and I think anybody who happened to see it, because it really showed this level of inequality that, of course, feminism is about equality. But there was a moment of what I thought was extraordinary, seeing feminism in action and demanding equality, was when the women went to see Jeff Flake in the elevator in the Senate, and actually, I thought for the first time in a long time, I felt like this was democracy in action, because it was average people, women, going in and stopping a senator in the middle of this horrific week in this disgusting hearing, which was really dehumanizing to women. And they spoke their truth. And as dreadful as this all has been, it was for me, and I wanted to know what you felt about it. It was a moment where you thought, I don't know what the outcome of this will be, but we have to keep this voice going, and women cannot be afraid to use their voice and to talk to a man who actually responds as well, which was also kind of extraordinary given the circumstances. So I just wanted your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Oh, does everyone know what the speaker's referring to? Yeah, there was that video.
Do you want to just take everyone just briefly?
I'm so sorry. It was a video in which two women, one a survivor, maybe both. One was very teary and one was quite kind of confrontational, and they were in an elevator insisting that Jeff Flake, Senator Jeff Flake, a Republican, hear what they had to say about their trauma and hear what they wanted the outcome to be of the hearings. I'm sorry to say I don't know if that video, certainly it appeared that women were using their voices and it appeared that he was listening, but I'm so cynical as a former political consultant about optics. I don't know if Jeff Flake's staffers let those women into that elevator, because it's a highly secure environment. It's not that easy to waltz up to the senator in the hearing and confront him. You'll be dragged away by security under ordinary circumstances. You know, the staffers, I mean, Washington is so devious, the staffers could have let those women confront him so that he would seem responsive and compassionate before they all railroad this guy into his seat on the Supreme Court. You know, that's entirely plausible. He certainly seemed to be listening to them, but as far as I know, his latest vote is that he's going to wait for the FBI investigation. But the FBI investigation isn't a real investigation. It's had every kind of curtailment. To me, apart from all the gender issues this raises and the assault issues this raises, very scary that the executive is interfering with law enforcement. Right? That's fascism. When the executive interferes with law enforcement and says you cannot investigate this, this, or this. So I'm sad to say, on the one hand, very moving. On the other hand, who knows what use will be made of it.
So we're already running over. I think we've got this lady's had her hand up. Oh, and at the back. Do we have time for two more questions? Yep. Sorry. Oh.
Hi. Can I just ask? Today now, can you define what feminism means to you? Because we've had this whole discussion about it, but we haven't had a fresh definition today.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. I don't offer a fresh definition. I go way back to the Enlightenment, which is where I think feminism needs to be situated. In the Enlightenment, there were these incredibly cool ideas that emerged into the world, that people were entitled to equality under law and due process, freedom of speech, and to be evaluated on their merits. And the feminism I believe in is literally just a part of that Enlightenment insight about the equality of all human beings. Of course, not manifested properly in the 18th century, but it's just part of universal human rights. It's part of universal longing for democracy, manifestation of democracy. So that's what feminism is to me.
And we've got, well, thank you. And we've got this.
What do you think about the harmony that could happen if feminism were kind of co-assigned the environment issues? Because violation of people being violated, either men or women, or people as a whole, is really a sort of survival issue of other things. And to draw reason about sustainment overall does actually mean that the painful aspect to trauma can be recognised, because the way in which we support industry and the way it pillages Mother Nature, let's face it. It's just sometimes you can combine feminism with. I mean, what do you think about feminism plus environment to make it more palatable?
Thank you. I think I got it. I don't mean to cut you off, but I think I understand what you're saying. So there is a really great movement already underway. It's been underway since at least the 80s, and I really recommend you take a look, called ecofeminism, in which that union did get created, in which people use feminist insights to support environmental activism and vice versa. I do think you're onto something, because I don't see the fight to save the planet as gendered, but I do definitely, as a mom and as a mom in the culture, I do see the way people think. You can just take and take and take and take from it, and she's never going to stop loving you, is just very conditioned by the place of the mother in society, and the woman in society. That's someone you can just abuse and just rip off and rape, and it's fine, because she'll just keep coming back and keep giving you food and keep looking after you. And it's very important for us, I think, to understand that both women and nature have a breaking point.
I could go on forever, but I think we've probably gone on the longest out of all of the talks. Naomi, thank you so much. You've really made a dream come true today for me, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And please come back and visit us, and we're all going to be devouring your book.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you for this wonderful event.